I'm Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today has a career in broadcasting that spans nearly 7 decades. He was the first voice of CBC Fredericton when it launched in 1964. Please welcome Ross Ingram. Thank you, Ross, for being here today and sitting down with me.
Well, glad to be here. Glad for the opportunity.
And I should say, one of the faces of CHCO as well. We're so proud to have a legend such as you on our team. I'd love to know, though, when in your life did you first take an interest in radio and broadcasting? Do you remember what it was like in your childhood when it first sparked an interest?
I was probably about 10 years old, and we took a tour of the radio station. You know how in school you take the kids on tours. They took us to the radio station, and I guess I was smitten by it right there. And the people at the radio station explained everything to us. This was the thing. All sorts of tours went through there, but they took time to explain everything to us. And of that group, there are 3, I think I know, that did go on to broadcasting. Because when we got into high school, we had a high school radio club that did a weekly program on CK-TV. This was CK-TV in St. Catharines, Ontario. And that weekly program was produced by us. We did everything. We did sports interviews, and actually, my very first time on the air, I was Rip Van Winkle. And I was just waking up at the beginning of the program, and that was my debut. Rip Van Winkle wakes up, and that was, wow, that was a long time ago, 1952 or 53, way back there. So finished high school and got some, really part-time jobs. One of them with the first FM station, one of the first 3, I think, in Canada, was CJSH-FM in Hamilton. Worked there for a short time. Then went on to CHVC in Niagara Falls for a short time. And really first full-time lengthy job I had was at CKEC in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, and worked there for 5 years. Went on to CKCL for a short time. That was in Truro. Then the venerable CHSJ in St. John, and loved it there. And while I was in St. John, I made the acquaintance of a CBC producer in Halifax called Harold Hathaway. And I said, look, you're not getting anything out of New Brunswick on Maritime Magazine. You're the program that you're doing in Halifax. How about some stuff from St. John? And he said, go to it. So I did. That was kind of my introduction to CBC. Then I went from CHSJ to CBHT in Halifax, coordinating producer up there for a period of time. Then on to CBI in Sydney, the CBC station in Sydney. And while I was there, CBC decided to put a radio station in Fredericton. And Harold Hathaway was the manager, so he gave me a call. And that was it. Ended up in Fredericton in 1963, and television came along in 1970. And
you were, Ross, tell people, you were the first face of CBC Fredericton as well. You're the first voice in 1964.
Yeah,
what
that's
was it
right.
like to then be the first face of it, too?
I got to do a lot of pioneering. Television. Well, radio was interesting because we just worked it from the ground up. There was absolutely nothing here as far as CBC goes when we came to Fredericton. So we devised our own programs and had to carry the CBC programs, of course, a lot of the time, but we devised our own programs and set up a newsroom with one person. And then TV came along, and that was another pioneering thing. First camera was an industrial camera. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's used, I guess now in what they call closed circuit television, you know, for surveillance. Well, that's the kind of camera we had. So there it was, about that wide, and that high, and a lens on the front of it about that big. So when you wanted to go close up on anything, it went like this. And when you wanted to go from one thing to another, it went like this. And people couldn't understand it. And CHSJ, of course, which was carrying the program, we didn't have a TV station for a long period of time. CHSJ-TV carried the program. And when they were carrying the program, they had all the latest equipment. And here was this black and white thing, you know. But it was a real good experience. And it was live. Everything was live. So, you know, if you had 2 minutes and 35 seconds to do an interview, you better get out of it by 2 minutes and 30.
Wow. What was it like to experience not just being a pioneer in terms of coming up with programming ideas, but you're also having to adapt to new technology all the time? I guess we can't complain these days when we see the type of equipment you would have had to learn to use back then.
Yeah, well, okay, I was out of CBC. I retired from CBC in about '86. And during that time, that wasn't the great push then in technology. We were pretty well, you know, a 3-camera normal operation, and people had to be there to do all these things. And it was after my time that technology came along. I was up to CBC for a tour not too long ago. And CBC in Fredericton, I would not recognize it. Everything is computerized, and you're on camera and you don't know it a lot of the times up there. So, you know, it's just amazing what the technology has done. It's in many ways a lot bigger than it was when I left, but if it wasn't for the technology, it would have been twice as big, you know.
Yeah.
Technology saves a lot of repetitive actions, you know, and it's good.
What could we learn from looking back at the decades that you were in radio and television prior to the era we're in now that young journalists could take away from that? What lessons should we be garnering from how things were done?
There's one principal lesson that has never changed, and it's this. It's still a business, and television too to a certain extent, but radio is a business of one person talking to one person at a time. You know, you hear people, I come on the air and say, good evening Toronto or good evening Montreal. No such person. One person at a time. And that, if you remember that, and remember that the person that's listening to you or watching you is another person, you know, that's do you in good stead. That's all you need to remember.
When you think back on interviews you did, what are some that stand out to you that had a lasting impact, not just on the stories that you put out into the world, but things that you remember fondly now?
Well, back in the Sydney days, I got to speak to the Prime Ministers of Canada, which is rather interesting, Lester Pearson, John Diefenbaker, and they were interesting, personally interesting people, you know. Of course they had their message, but they were personally interesting people, and politics was, I think there was a bit of fun about politics in those days. I always enjoyed speaking to them. There were dozens of people over the years, from the sublime, the politicians, the prime ministers, and to the ridiculous. One of the people who, and when interviews were to be done for CBC in the early days of television here, I was it. Mm-hmm. And I never knew who was going to turn up to be interviewed. And all the local politicians, Richard Hatfield and all these people, and one day somebody said, there's a woman visiting town and you're going to interview her tonight. at 5:30. I said, okay, who is she? Turned out to be the happy hooker. And I thought, wow, where do I go from here? and
how would you handle an interview like that? I mean, where would you go for questions? How did you prepare when you were not sure who was walking in from one moment to the next?
Well, they would come in. We'd get them to come in usually about an hour early, and we had a researcher on the program too, who would talk to them first and get some of the interesting stuff, and then I'd try and get a line on them too, and talk to them after that. And yeah, it usually worked out, but we had just a certain period of time, because some of the things were videotape. Thank goodness we had videotape. So we'd have, let's say, 27 minutes or 23 minutes on videotape, which means we'd need another 4 minutes and 30 seconds for an interview. And it was really one of the things that happened. One of the things I remember there was we had this politician in, a minister of something, can't remember what he was, and I started. I asked him the first question before we talked it over beforehand, and I'm going to ask you this, this, and this, and this, and he said, okay, that's great. And so I asked him the first question, and he went into great detail when I was talking to him beforehand. When we got on the air, he looked over and he saw his face on the monitor, which we learned a lesson there, keep the monitor away. And he froze. And he answered the question in about 10 or 12 words. And then he answered the next question about 10 or 12 words. He couldn't remember any of the things that he said before. So I asked him about some of the upcoming things in the government that people might be interested in. He immediately gave this great story about what was going to happen 2 weeks from now, and that was a complete scoop. Nobody heard of it before. His handler was out in the office, and he was pale. He said, "Mr. Minister, that hasn't gone through the House yet." He said, "It doesn't matter, it will." So we had a clear scoop on that one. Also had a clear scoop on the Point Lepreau. New Brunswick is going to enter the nuclear age, and we got that. Well, I'm not even going to tell you how we got it now. They might still be alive and be in trouble, but yeah, things like that stick in your mind. I think about television too. We were talking about radio earlier. I traveled the whole province for television. And the thing that got me was that you'd go into a store in Campbellton, or go into some business, let's say in Edmundston or down in St. Stephen, and people would say, "You look familiar." And the first thing they would do was to say, "Now, are you a member of the local Lions Club? You know, or are you? Do you know anybody that works at the local newspaper?" And the last thing that would come to their mind, all of a sudden the light would come on to say, the television program. So that in a way is a compliment. It means that you are making that one-to-one connection that radio and television is. It's just wonderful that way. And it is one-on-one.
And Ross, you still do a radio show today out of your home studio. Why is it something you continue to do and continue to pursue?
Well, we had a radio station, CJRI, in Fredericton for 18 years, 16, something like that, 18 years, I think. And we didn't get the license renewed. But I kept on the online. Like every radio station, when they come on the air these days, they also come online. And online was always interesting to me because we'd hear from South Africa and South China and Bolivia and everything. We hear you online, and I was really impressed. Like in the early days of radio, if you're heard in the next town, it was really something. But here you are, heard all over the world. So I said, I'm not going to drop that. I'm going to keep it up. So I did, and it's still going, and still has a fair number of listeners. And as a retired person, it keeps me out of trouble, keeps me busy.
I should say hardly retired, because we have you on CHCO with The Way I See It, which is Ross Ingram's take. I think at the legend level that you are at, Ross, it's well deserved. It's sort of like having our own Andy Rooney in-house. It's our Ross.
Andy Rooney, I like it. Yeah.
But when the way you see it is important, because you've seen so much, you've experienced so much. And I wonder what your advice would be to aspiring young journalists, especially that are, growing up in an age of TikTok. And I'm not saying TikTok's not important, we use it here too, but there's lessons to be garnered from the way news and programming was done in previous decades. What would your best advice be to someone pursuing this career path now, in a time where technology changes really weekly?
Well, previous decades, I guess, your technology was the telephone and the typewriter. And you have to have an interest, I think, in people and the things people are doing, and you have to have a news sense, whatever that is. Some people don't have it, and some people do. And a news sense is an honest interest in other people. And then you should have some proficiency with the English language also. And there are all sorts of people on the air today, but the people that last for decades in this business are people who perfect their use of the language as much as possible, and they people who keep up. Like the language changes. I think there's a survey or some organization every year says these are the new words that you can use. Yeah, a lot of them keep up to date with them. The other thing is, language changes, and so should your use of the language. There is all sorts of things in radio, newspapers too, I guess, where people take words that they really don't understand and use them. They take words and misuse them. For instance, these days you'll hear them talking about a large amount of people. It's not a large amount of people, it's a large number. Amount is quantity. People are individuals, they're numbers. Watch TV and listen to radio, and you'll find people, amazing people, using the language like that. Oh, there's a whole bunch of other things. A lot of times I don't enjoy watching TV.
I would have to ask though, Ross, because to me you're the man with the golden tonsils. I asked you the first time I met you about your voice. Is that something though that can be practiced in any way, or is it just a gift? Because we get asked a lot for TV, how do I perfect my news voice? You really just have it. I have to tell people you sound like this all the time, but I'm very jealous. But are there any tips that you could give people who want to perfect their on-air presence?
Yeah. I've been blessed. Yeah, I've made a living at it. It's been good. Yeah, the thing is not so much the voice quality as how you use it. And one of the things that I am now of a certain age that's helped me maintain the voice is diaphragmatic breathing. Now, briefly, what you do is take your diaphragm is down here somewhere, I guess. You take a diaphragm full of air, and then you can just let it out a bit by bit by bit by bit for a tremendous amount of time. But what it does, your voice, whatever voice you have, you're able to get the best use out of it. And yeah, voice is 75% important, but the other 25% is how you use it. And get that all the time, you know. Some people try to develop it on their own. And so you hear them talking on the radio, and it just isn't anybody that you recognize at all. And then that's called a studio voice. And then you talk to them off the air, and who is this guy? Yeah.
That's what we should learn from the best, because you really do sound like this all the time. You're going to be marking 70 years from the first time you heard your voice on the radio next year in 2026. When we look at the state that news especially is in right now, what do you think needs to change or needs to happen for local news to continue everywhere? There really are many pockets of our country that don't have any semblance of local news anymore.
Well, and CHCO is a good example of local news. I think one of the problems these days is large companies taking over broadcasting. Okay, you have companies that, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because some communities wouldn't have service at all if it wasn't for these companies. But what happens there is, okay, let's go back to New Glasgow, where I worked at CKEC there. We were the only game in town. I mean, we had about, I guess at the best of it, we had about 90% of the available radio audience, because we did things like 12:30 every day. There'd be the local news, and I mean local stories. Somebody out in the country built a 3-story hen coop, and he was on the air for 3 days. You know, that's one example, not a good one maybe. Then it was the local weather, with all the details you get your hands on. And the third thing was the funeral announcements. People would not miss 12:30 every day. That was local. And when you get these chains that are operating radio stations coast to coast, they don't bother with that anymore. Well, they can't. Yeah. Like I was listening. I picked up a new car the other day, and of course, when you get in the car, there's somebody, the salesman or somebody, tunes in a radio station. So I was listening to the radio station. I thought, wow, how long has this station been in town? This guy was good. And then, about 10 minutes later, I hear him say, there's going to be a ladies' home something visit. You're going to visit the local hospital today. I didn't know about that. And he said, so that's the ladies' home, whatever name the group was, in Collingwood, Ontario. Coast to coast, obviously, talking about Collingwood, Ontario. Great for Collingwood, not so great for us. So, yeah, CKEC was bought by one of the chains, and they decided to bring another radio station in. Both of them. There's hardly any local at all. So that's it. We need more little local stations. We need more people to come along, maybe, and even put these little 50-watt stations on the air, and just cover the towns and villages and what have you. When it comes to television, nobody can do it better than CHCO, because CBC is not going to cover a St. Andrews Town Council meeting, obviously. The CTV is basically programmed out of Halifax, do a good job on provincial and national news. Local, not so good. So it's a good situation in a way. A lot of places that wouldn't have media now have it, but on the other hand, a lot of local media has gone down the tubes, including newspapers. As you know, since CHCO has come to the rescue of one of them, local, that's it. And the loss of local is a sad thing in broadcasting in this country.
Well, spoken like a true legend who knows his industry, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have you on our team, helping to keep local alive in a corner of New Brunswick I know you love. We're in the last minute of the show for today. I'd love to have you back regularly though, Ross, because I think these conversations at this point in time, especially in media, are important to have. So I would love to have you back again soon if you'd be up for it.
Well, just ask.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to our next sit down.
My pleasure.
My guest today has been legendary broadcaster Ross Ingram, who was the first voice of CBC Fredericton back in 1964. We are proud to have him on the CHCO team today. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.